What happens when the man you are about to marry looks the most powerful people in the room dead in the eye and strips away your entire existence with three little words? Just a friend. For 2 years, Amelia hid her extraordinary truth to experience a normal life, a normal love. But when her fiancé chose ambition over their vows in a room full of New York's most ruthless elites, he didn't just break her heart. He awoke a sleeping giant. Within minutes of his ultimate betrayal, the delicate, unassuming woman he threw away was surrounded by a heavily armed royal motorcade, leaving a room of billionaires completely paralyzed with terror and regret. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with the kind of low intoxicating frequency that only absolute wealth can produce. It was the annual philanthropic gala for Harrison and Tate Holdings, a night where millionaires desperately tried to impress billionaires under the guise of charity. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen rain, casting a warm, fragmented glow over the sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive gardenias, truffles, and the sharp metallic tang of unbridled ambition. Amelia stood quietly near a towering pillar of white orchids, nursing a glass of sparkling water. She looked deceptively simple. While the women around her wore gowns drowning in sequins and flaunted diamond necklaces that screamed of their husbands' stock portfolios, Amelia wore a vintage midnight blue silk gown. It bore no recognizable logo, though to a trained eye the immaculate tailoring whispered of a Parisian atelier that only took commissions from heads of state. Around her neck was a delicate teardrop sapphire, an heirloom she rarely took off, though she always tucked it beneath her collar when she was at the grocery store or the local coffee shop. Tonight it rested against her collarbone, largely ignored by the fiercely competitive socialites orbiting her. She was waiting for Dominic. Dominic Chandler was a man who moved through the world as if he were constantly auditioning for a role he hadn't yet secured. He was handsome, ruthlessly charming, and currently an ascending vice president at Harrison and Tate. For Dominic, tonight was not about charity. It was the most critical networking event of his career. He was gunning for a partnership, and the keys to that kingdom belonged to Richard DuPont, the firm's largest international investor. When Amelia and Dominic had first met at a small, rainy bookstore in Chelsea 2 years ago, he had seemed entirely different. He had been enchanted by her quiet demeanor, her lack of pretense, and her passion for historical architecture. She had told him she worked in archival research, a convenient half-truth. She loved that he didn't know the heavy gilded reality of her bloodline. She loved being just Amelia. They had gotten engaged privately just 3 weeks ago on a quiet beach in Montauk. No flashy announcements, no press, just a ring of promise and a secret between two people. Or so she thought. "You look lost," a voice cut through the hum of the crowd. Amelia turned to see Dominic approaching. His tuxedo was impeccably tailored, his hair perfectly swept back. His eyes, however, darted nervously around the room, scanning the VIP tables. "Just taking it all in," Amelia smiled softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "It's beautiful, Dom. You've worked so hard for this night." Dominic offered a tight, distracted smile. Yeah, it's coming together. Listen, Amelia." He lowered his voice, leaning in close. "Richard DuPont is here, and his daughter Caroline. They're sitting at the platinum table near the stage. DuPont has been dropping hints all week that he's looking for a specific kind of executive to run the new European division. A family man, but you know the right kind of family." Amelia frowned slightly, a knot tightening in her stomach. "What does that mean, Dominic?" "It means appearances are everything tonight," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "Caroline is incredibly influential with her father. If she likes you, he likes you. She's particular, used to the highest tier of society. I need this to go flawlessly." "I know how to speak to people, Dom," Amelia said, keeping her tone light despite the sudden chill in the air. "I know you do, sweetie. It's just, maybe don't mention the archival work or the tiny apartment. Just nod, smile, and let me do the talking." Before Amelia could process the patronizing sting of his words, a loud theatrical laugh erupted from a few feet away. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and Caroline Dupont glided into their periphery. Caroline was striking, sharp-featured, and draped in an emerald gown that left very little to the imagination. She moved with the predatory confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire 30 years of existence. Trailing behind her was her father, Richard Dupont, a silver-haired titan of industry whose stern face looked as though it had been carved from granite. Dominic's entire posture transformed. His spine straightened, his chest puffed out, and the nervous energy vanished, replaced by a slick, practiced charisma. "Richard, Caroline," Dominic called out, stepping forward with outstretched arms. "It is an absolute honor to have you both here tonight." Richard offered a curt nod while Caroline extended a limp hand for Dominic to kiss. "Dominic, darling!" She purred her eyes, immediately darting over his shoulder to land on Amelia. Caroline's gaze swept Amelia up and down, categorizing, appraising, and ultimately dismissing her in the span of 3 seconds. "I see you brought a companion." The silence that stretched between them lasted only a second, but to Amelia it felt like an eternity. She waited for Dominic to smile, to pull her forward by the waist, to proudly announce, "This is my fiancé, Amelia." She waited for the warmth he had promised her in Montauk. Instead, Dominic stepped subtly to the side, creating a physical gap between himself and the woman he was supposed to marry. "Oh, Amelia." Dominic laughed, a hollow, dismissive sound that struck Amelia like a physical blow. "She's just a friend, someone from my college days who helps out with organization. She's heading home soon, actually." The chandelier lights above seemed to violently dim in Amelia's periphery. The room dropped away. "Just a friend." The words echoed in her mind, ringing with absolute horrifying clarity. She looked at Dominic, searching his face for a sign of a joke, a mistake, a sudden retraction. But Dominic wasn't looking at her. He was staring eagerly at Richard Dupont, desperate for the billionaire's approval. "A friend." Caroline repeated, a cruel, knowing smirk playing on her lips. "How charitable of you, Dominic, to bring the hired help to experience a night among adults." "Well, you know me, Caroline." Dominic chuckled smoothly, completely ignoring the dagger plunged into Amelia's chest. Always trying to give back to the less fortunate. The sheer audacity of the betrayal left Amelia momentarily breathless. Her hand instinctively drifted toward the pocket of her clutch, where her modest diamond engagement ring, the ring Dominic had insisted they keep hidden until after his promotion was secured, sat heavy and cold in the darkness. "Is that so?" Richard Dupont grunted, barely glancing at Amelia. "We need sharks in the European division, Chandler, men unburdened by sentimental attachments or distractions. I'm glad to see you're focused on the firm." "Entirely focused, sir." Dominic agreed, his eyes shining with sycophantic zeal. "My career is my only bride." Amelia stood frozen, a ghost haunting her own life. The man she had loved, the man she had cooked for, nursed through flu seasons, and sacrificed her own security protocols to be with, was evaporating before her eyes. In his place stood a stranger composed entirely of cheap ambition and cowardice. "Well, don't just stand there, dear," Caroline said, turning her sharp gaze back to Amelia. She waved her champagne flute dismissively in Amelia's direction. "Be a good girl and fetch us some fresh drinks. The champagne at this table has gone terribly warm." Amelia's eyes locked onto Caroline's. For a moment, the ingrained training of her lifetime flared up the posture of a sovereign, the steady, unyielding stare of a woman whose ancestors had commanded armies. Caroline faltered for a fraction of a second, unsettled by the sudden chilling weight in Amelia's expression. It wasn't the look of a humiliated assistant. It was the look of a queen observing a peasant making a fatal miscalculation. But Dominic intervened, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. He grabbed Amelia by the elbow, his grip tight enough to bruise, and leaned in. "Do it, Amelia?" he hissed through a forced smile. "Don't ruin this for me. Just get the drinks and then take a cab home. I'll call you tomorrow." He released her arm and turned his back to her, seamlessly re-entering the conversation, with the DuPonts laughing at a joke Richard hadn't even finished making. Amelia stepped back. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The crushing weight of heartbreak was rapidly being replaced by something cold, sharp, and utterly merciless. Clarity. She turned and walked away from the VIP area, her posture perfectly straight, her steps measured. She didn't head for the bar. She headed for the heavy velvet drapes near the terrace doors, a quiet alcove shielded from the worst of the gala's noise. She opened her clutch. Inside, sitting next to the worthless engagement ring, was a customized, heavily encrypted satellite phone. It was a device she was only supposed to use in absolute emergencies, a direct line to a life she had kept locked away to protect the fragile illusion of Dominic Chandler. Amelia unlocked the screen. She opened the secure messaging interface. There was only one contact listed under the initial A. Noah, Colonel Noah Sterling, formerly of the SAS, currently the head of Royal Security for the Sovereign House of Kensington. For 2 years, Noah had hovered on the periphery of Amelia's life, agonizing over her insistence on living without a visible security detail. He had watched from unmarked vans and rented apartments across the street, a silent guardian bound by his oath to her father the king. Amelia typed a single brief message. "The experiment is over. Protocol Alpha. The Plaza. Now." She hit send. She slipped the phone back into her clutch and took a deep, steadying breath. She looked out over the ballroom, watching Dominic pour Caroline another glass of champagne, watching him touch her arm, watching him sell his soul for a corner office. Let him have his moment, she thought, a dark, regal calm settling over her, because his world is about to end. 10 blocks away, inside a secure, fortified brownstone that served as the Kensington royal family's clandestine New York base of operations, an alarm chimed. Colonel Noah Sterling, a tall, imposing man with ice-blue eyes and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, stared at the decrypted message on his monitor. He had waited 2 years for this exact message. He had hated Dominic Chandler from the moment he ran the man's background check and found a history of calculated social climbing and hidden debts. But a princess had to make her own mistakes. Noah stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. He pressed a button on his radio. "Attention all units." Noah's voice boomed hard and uncompromising, echoing through the secure communications channel to 20 heavily armed men stationed across the city. "Protocol Alpha is active. Her Royal Highness is extracting. Target location, the Plaza Hotel. Scramble the motorcade. I want full diplomatic sirens, State Department clearance, and NYPD escorts. We hit the front doors in 4 minutes. Noah grabbed his suit jacket, checking the weight of the Glock 19 in his shoulder holster. "Let's go retrieve our future queen." Back in the grand ballroom, the atmosphere remained sickeningly lavish. Dominic was making excellent progress. Richard Dupont was nodding along to his ideas about corporate restructuring, and Caroline had practically draped herself over his shoulder. "You know Dominic." Caroline purred, tracing the rim of her glass. "Daddy is hosting a private weekend at our estate in the Hamptons. Just a few select influential people. I think you'd fit right in, provided you don't bring any strays with you." Dominic laughed, his eyes glinting with triumph. "I assure you, Caroline, I travel extremely light. I've completely cut the dead weight from my life." He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see Amelia crying near the coat check or disappearing out the back doors. Instead, he saw her standing perfectly still near the center of the room. She hadn't left. She was just watching him. But there was something deeply unsettling about the way she was standing. Her shoulders were pulled back, her chin tilted upward. She looked taller, imposing, radiating an aura of quiet authority that Dominic had never seen before. It irritated him. Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she shrinking, Suddenly, a low rhythmic vibration rattled the crystal glasses on the tables. At first, people thought it was the subway rumbling beneath the streets, but the vibration grew louder, shifting from a low hum to a deafening mechanical roar. Then the flashing lights began. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the plaza, the street outside erupted into a blinding frenzy of strobe lights. Red and blue from NYPD cruisers, but also flashing amber and bright white LED strobes from massive armored vehicles. Conversations in the ballroom stuttered and died. The string quartet playing in the corner slowly squeaked to a halt. The elite guests of Harrison and Tate Holdings drifted toward the windows, champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. What on earth is going on? Richard DuPont grumbled, adjusting his glasses as he peered out the window. Is it a terrorist threat? A protest? Dominic stepped up beside him, trying to maintain his composed facade, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Outside the plaza, 59th Street had been completely shut down. Traffic was blocked in all directions by NYPD barricades. In the center of the clearing, a convoy of 6 pitch-black armored Chevrolet Suburbans, flanked by police motorcycles, slammed their brakes in perfect synchronization right at the front steps of the hotel. These weren't ordinary VIP SUVs. They bore diplomatic license plates. The front fenders were adorned with small, fluttering flags, a deep crimson background bearing a golden-crowned lion. Those are sovereign flags, a Wall Street hedge fund manager whispered from the crowd, his face pale. That's a foreign royal detail. Who the hell is in the building? Before anyone could answer, the heavy gilded oak doors of the grand ballroom didn't just open. They were thrust apart with violent military precision. The room gasped collectively. 6 men in immaculate dark charcoal suits stepped into the room. They moved like apex predators, their eyes scanning the crowd, their hands resting neutrally but dangerously near their lapels. Each man wore a discreet coiled earpiece. They fanned out instantly, securing the perimeter of the ballroom, establishing tactical dominance over a room full of bewildered billionaires in a matter of seconds. Following them was the manager of the Plaza Hotel, sweating profusely and looking entirely out of his depth. Finally, Colonel Noah Sterling entered the room. He was a terrifying sight, impeccably dressed, exuding a cold, lethal authority that made the corporate titans in the room look like frightened school children. He stopped just inside the doors, his icy blue eyes sweeping the crowd. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Noah didn't look at the mayor. He didn't look at Richard DuPont. He scanned the room until his eyes locked onto the woman in the vintage blue silk gown standing near the center of the room. The terrifying giant of a man bypassed the billionaires, walking straight past Dominic Chandler and Caroline DuPont without so much as a glance. He stopped 3 paces away from Amelia. The entire room watched in stunned, breathless silence as Noah Sterling, a man who looked like he could dismantle a tank with his bare hands, snapped his heels together. He placed his right arm across his chest and bowed deeply, perfectly from the waist. His voice, deep and accented with clipped aristocratic British steel, shattered the silence of the room. "Your Royal Highness!" Noah proclaimed the words, echoing off the marble walls. "The motorcade is secured. We are ready to escort you home." The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a physical entity. It was the sound of 100 deeply ingrained social hierarchies collapsing in real time. A crystal champagne flute slipped from Caroline DuPont's manicured fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering with a sharp, violent crack that echoed through the paralyzed room. The expensive vintage splashed against the hem of her emerald gown, but she didn't even blink. Her mouth hung slightly open, her eyes wide, staring at the woman she had just ordered to fetch a drink. Dominic's brain simply refused to process the scene. His reality had encountered a fatal error. He looked at the heavily armed men forming a protective phalanx around Amelia. He looked at the giant of a man, Noah Sterling, who remained bowed at a perfect 45-degree angle. And then slowly, agonizingly, he looked at Amelia, The woman he had shared a cramped Chelsea apartment with, the woman who had happily eaten takeout Thai food on the floor while he complained about his boss, was gone. In her place stood a stranger. The vintage blue silk gown suddenly didn't look modest anymore. It looked like armor. The delicate sapphire at her throat caught the chandelier light burning with a deep ancient fire. She wasn't just standing, she was holding court. Noah. Amelia's voice rang out. It was no longer the soft, agreeable tone she used when comforting Dominic after a long day. It was a voice engineered by centuries of aristocratic breeding, crisp, commanding, and cold enough to freeze the East River. "You are 3 minutes late." Noah straightened his face, an impenetrable mask of duty. "Traffic on the FDR, Your Royal Highness. The NYPD cleared it as efficiently as possible. The perimeter is secure. The jet is fueled on the tarmac at Teterboro." "Good," Amelia said calmly. "Amelia." Dominic's voice cracked. It was a pathetic, reedy sound, entirely stripped of the slick bravado he had wielded only 5 minutes prior. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand reaching out instinctively. "Amelia, what is this? What is he talking about? Royal Highness?" Before Dominic could even close the distance, 2 of the men in charcoal suits moved with terrifying, fluid speed. They didn't shout. They didn't draw weapons. One man simply stepped into Dominic's path, placing a hand the size of a dinner plate flat against Dominic's chest, stopping his forward momentum with the immovable force of a brick wall. "Step back, sir," the security agent said. The tone was polite, but the grip on Dominic's lapel implied that if he moved another inch, his collarbone would be snapped into 3 distinct pieces. "Get your hands off me." Dominic stammered, panic finally piercing through his shock. He looked frantically at the room, then at Richard DuPont, hoping for backup. But Richard DuPont was staring at Amelia, his face draining of all color. DuPont was a billionaire, a titan of international finance. He knew the global players. He knew the faces of the people who held the real wealth of the world, the sovereign funds, the royal holding companies, the quiet trillion-dollar empires that made Wall Street look like a child's piggy bank. He stared at the sapphire on Amelia's neck, and then the flags fluttering on the SUVs outside the window, the crimson background, the golden-crowned lion, the House of Kensington. Richard DuPont whispered the words trembling on his lips. "Good God!" Amelia turned her gaze slowly away from Noah and let it settle on Dominic. The look she gave him contained no anger, no heartbreak, and no sorrow. It contained only absolute chilling pity. It was the look one gives a bug just before stepping on it. "You wanted a life unburdened by sentimental attachments, Dominic." Amelia said, her voice projecting effortlessly across the silent room. "You wanted to swim with the sharks." "Amelia, please, I didn't mean—" "Address her as Your Royal Highness." Noah interrupted his voice, dropping an octave, his hand resting casually on the grip of his concealed firearm. "Or do not speak at all." Dominic swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. Your Royal Highness, please, this is a misunderstanding. I was trying to play the game tonight. I was doing it for us, for our future." "There is no us, Mr. Chandler," Amelia said, deliberately stripping away his first name. "I spent 2 years stepping out of the gilded cage of my birthright. I wanted to see if the world held genuine people. I wanted to know if I could be loved for my mind, my spirit, and my quiet life, rather than the GDP of a European principality. You passed the test for a long time. But tonight, when the chips were down, you didn't just fail, Dominic. You sold me out for a promotion." She took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The security detail shifted seamlessly to accommodate her movement. "You introduced me as just a friend?" Amelia continued, her voice echoing perfectly in the dead silent ballroom. "You allowed this woman—" She gestured dismissively toward Caroline, who flinched as if struck To humiliate me, and you did it with a smile on your face. I was protecting you. Dominic lied, the desperation making his voice shrill. I didn't want you involved in this ruthless corporate— Stop talking, Amelia commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an imperial decree. Dominic's mouth snapped shut. Amelia turned her attention to Richard DuPont. The billionaire immediately stiffened, instinctively recognizing that he was in the presence of an apex predator. Mr. DuPont, Amelia said smoothly. My father, King Edward, holds the controlling stake in the Vanguard Kensington Sovereign Wealth Fund. I believe that fund currently underwrites approximately 42% of Harrison and Tate's European leveraged buyouts. Is that correct? Richard DuPont looked as though he might vomit. He nodded quickly, his corporate arrogance entirely vaporized. Yes, Your Royal Highness. It is an honor to— Do not grovel, Mr. DuPont. It is unseemly. Amelia cut him off gracefully. I overheard your conversation. You are looking for a shark to run your European division. You want a man unburdened by loyalty. I highly recommend Mr. Chandler. He is uniquely qualified in the art of betrayal. I leave him in your capable hands. She didn't wait for a response. Amelia turned her back on Dominic Chandler, stripping him of the one thing he craved most her attention. She walked toward the heavy oak doors. Noah Sterling and the security detail formed a diamond formation around her. As she passed the string quartet, she paused for a fraction of a second. Keep playing, she murmured to the terrified cellist. And then Crown Princess Amelia of Kensington walked out of the Plaza Hotel, leaving the ruins of a man's entire existence smoldering on the marble floor behind her. The moment the massive armored doors of the plaza closed behind the royal detail, the grand ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. It was as if a spell had been broken. Cell phones were whipped out of tuxedo pockets. Dozens of high society elites were frantically dialing editors at Vanity Fair, Bloomberg, and the Financial Times. In the center of the madness, Dominic Chandler stood entirely alone. The physical space around him had expanded. People were actively backing away from him, as if he were carrying a highly contagious flesh-eating virus. He turned toward Richard DuPont, plastering on a weak, terrified smile. Richard, sir, obviously this is a massive shock to me as well. I had no idea she was— Shut your mouth, Chandler. DuPont snarled, his voice a vicious, low rasp. The billionaire was shaking with rage. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you have any comprehension of the geopolitical and financial disaster you just dropped into the lap of my firm? Sir, my personal relationship shouldn't affect my qualifications for the VP position. Some VP position. DuPont let out a harsh barking laugh. It contained zero humor. Are you clinically insane? You brought the sole heir to $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund to my event. You treated her like an indentured servant, and you allowed my daughter to order her to fetch drinks. Caroline, for her part, was frantically dabbing at her spilled champagne, looking utterly humiliated. Daddy, I didn't know, she whined, her usual haughty demeanor entirely broken. She looked so plain. Both of you, shut up, DuPont roared, ignoring the stares of the surrounding guests. He stepped directly into Dominic's personal space, jabbing a thick, aggressive finger into Dominic's chest. Harrison and Tate manages the wealth of kings, prime ministers, and global conglomerates. Trust and discretion are our only currency. You just proved to a room full of the most powerful people in New York that you would sell out your own fiancé for a pat on the head. You are a liability, Chandler. I can fix this, Dominic pleaded, his eyes darting frantically. I can call her. I'll apologize. You will do nothing, DuPont hissed. As of this exact second, you are terminated from Harrison and Tate. Your security clearance to the building is revoked. If I see you within 500 feet of my offices, I will have you arrested for corporate trespassing. You are radioactive, Chandler. By tomorrow morning, no firm on Wall Street, no hedge fund in Mayfair, and no bank in Zurich will touch you. You are done. DuPont turned on his heel, grabbed Caroline by the arm, and stormed toward the exit, shouting for his driver. Dominic stood frozen under the glittering chandeliers. He had spent 10 years clawing his way up the corporate ladder. He had sacrificed his morals, his sleep, and ultimately his soul to secure his place among the elite. And in the span of 10 minutes, it had all burned to the ground. Outside, the motorcade had already vanished into the Manhattan night, but the storm was just beginning. By 6 a.m. the next morning, the world exploded. The story was too perfect, too intoxicating for the global media to ignore. It had everything royalty, undercover romance, extreme wealth, and a devastating public betrayal. The front page of the Daily Mail featured a massive, grainy paparazzi photograph of Amelia stepping into the armored Suburban alongside a picture of a shell-shocked Dominic standing alone in the ballroom. The headline screamed in bold 72-point font, "Just a friend, Wall Street climber. Dumps secret princess for a promotion, loses everything." CNN ran continuous coverage. Anderson Cooper dedicated an entire segment to the psychological profile of extreme wealth and undercover living, while financial anchors on CNBC scrambled to analyze whether the House of Kensington would pull their sovereign funds from American markets in retaliation. Denomorhin, Amelia, meanwhile, had retreated to the ultimate fortress. She was residing in the heavily fortified Kensington Consulate, a sprawling 6-story limestone mansion on the Upper East Side. The perimeter was locked down by heavily armed diplomatic security, NYPD counterterrorism units, and Noah Sterling's personal SAS trained detail. She sat in the sunroom, overlooking a private courtyard, sipping Earl Grey tea from a bone china cup. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. The heavy, restrictive mantle of royalty had settled back onto her shoulders, but she felt a strange sense of liberation. The charade was over. Noah stood at attention near the mahogany double doors, a tablet in his hand. "Sit down, Noah, for heaven's sake," Amelia sighed, not looking up from her tea. "You're making me tired just looking at you." Noah allowed a fraction of a smile to touch his scarred face. He took a seat in the wingback chair opposite her. "Force of habit, ma'am. The perimeter is secure. King Edward called an hour ago. He sends his regards and wishes to inform you that he always thought Mr. Chandler had the spine of a jellyfish." Amelia chuckled softly, a bittersweet sound. Father never did mince words. "Ma'am, the situation with Mr. Chandler is escalating." Noah set his tone, shifting to pure tactical professionalism. "He has attempted to breach the consulate's phone lines 42 times in the last 12 hours. He has sent hundreds of emails to your old decrypted accounts, and my intelligence officers have intercepted communications indicating he has retained the services of Simon Gallagher." Amelia's brow furrowed. "The crisis PR agent, the one who specializes in tabloid spin for disgraced politicians. The very same." Noah nodded. "It appears Mr. Chandler is attempting a counter-narrative. Gallagher has been shopping a story to the British tabloids. The angle is the cruel royal trap. They intend to paint you as a manipulative, out-of-touch aristocrat who played with a normal man's heart as a social experiment, deliberately setting him up to fail for your own amusement." Amelia set her teacup down. The delicate clink of porcelain against the saucer was the only sound in the room. Her eyes, usually soft and empathetic, crystallized into something hard and unyielding. "Is he now?" Amelia murmured. "We can have the tabloids hit with a super injunction by noon, ma'am," Noah suggested. "We can bury the story. We can bury Gallagher. We can make sure Dominic Chandler never finds work outside of a fast food drive-thru." Amelia looked out the window, watching a solitary leaf fall from the old oak tree in the courtyard. She thought about the 2 years she had given Dominic. She thought about the nights she had rubbed his shoulders when he was stressed about work, the times she had budgeted her meager archival salary to buy him a nice watch for his birthday, the way he had stepped aside and let Caroline Dupont humiliate her. Dominic didn't just want to apologize, he wanted to destroy her reputation to salvage his own. "No, Noah," Amelia said softly. A super injunction makes it look like we have something to hide. It makes him look like a victim being silenced by the crown. We are not going to silence him." Noah raised an eyebrow. "Then what are your orders, Your Royal Highness?" Amelia turned to look at her head of security, a dangerous regal smile playing on her lips. "Bring him to me." Dominic Chandler's apartment looked like the site of a natural disaster. Empty scotch bottles cluttered the glass coffee table alongside a mountain of final notice bills and legal threats. In the span of 4 days, his bank accounts had been frozen, pending a sudden mysterious audit. His landlord had served him with an eviction notice citing a morals clause, and his face was splashed across every television screen in America as the ultimate punchline of the decade. He was sitting on his leather sofa, unshaven, wearing sweatpants, staring blankly at a muted television. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He lunged for it, desperate for it to be Simon Gallagher with good news. The caller ID simply read, "Unknown caller." Dominic answered it, his voice a raspy whisper. "Hello, Mr. Chandler." A deep, crisp, violently British voice echoed through the speaker. Dominic instantly recognized it. The hair on his arm stood up. It was Noah Sterling. "What do you want?" Dominic snapped, trying to summon a bravado he entirely lacked. "Haven't you people done enough? Gallagher told me not to speak to you." "Mr. Gallagher is currently tied up in a meeting with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs regarding several offshore accounts he failed to declare," Noah said calmly, the threat hanging in the air like a guillotine. "He will not be returning your calls ever again." Dominic felt the blood drain from his face. His last lifeline had just been severed by the British government. "Her Royal Highness has requested an audience with you." Noah continued, his tone devoid of emotion. "A black car is waiting downstairs. You have exactly 3 minutes to get in it. If you do not, we will consider your media campaign an act of aggression against the Crown, and we will respond accordingly. Do I make myself clear, C.T. Tau?" 10 minutes later, Dominic was sitting in the back of an armored Bentley surrounded by tinted glass and terrifying silence. He expected to be taken to a warehouse or perhaps a discreet hotel room. Instead, the Bentley drove straight into the heart of Manhattan and pulled into the fortified underground garage of the Kensington Consulate. Dominic was escorted by 2 silent, heavily armed guards into a private elevator that shot up to the top floor. He was sweating profusely through his hastily thrown-on suit. He rehearsed his apologies, his excuses, his pleas for mercy. He would beg. He would do whatever it took to stop the bleeding of his life. The elevator doors chimed and opened. Dominic stepped out into a room that defied logic. It was a massive vaulted library lined with rare books and ancient tapestries. The windows were bulletproof, offering a sweeping, panoramic view of the New York skyline. It was an environment of absolute, unquestionable power. Sitting at the far end of the room behind a massive antique mahogany desk was Amelia. She wasn't wearing a vintage gown or a casual sweater. She was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray business suit. Her hair was pulled back into an immaculate severe twist. Resting on the desk in front of her were 2 thick leather-bound folders. Noah stood in the corner of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, watching Dominic with the cold detachment of an executioner. "Sit," Amelia commanded. She didn't look up from the document she was reading. Dominic's legs felt like lead. He crossed the expansive Persian rug and sank into the heavy leather chair opposite her. He opened his mouth to speak, to launch into his rehearsed litany of apologies, but the sheer, overwhelming presence of the room choked the words in his throat. Amelia finally closed the folder and looked at him. Her eyes were devoid of the warmth he remembered. They were the eyes of a sovereign assessing a hostile state. "You look terrible, Dominic." She noted her tone conversational, but laced with frost. "Amelia, please." Dominic choked out his hands, trembling on his knees. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I lost my mind that night. I was blinded by the pressure by Dupont." I didn't mean any of it. I love you. Amelia let out a short, hollow laugh. It was a terrifying sound. You love the idea of survival, Dominic. You love yourself. Do not insult my intelligence by using that word. She pushed one of the leather folders across the desk toward him. Open it, she instructed. Dominic reached out with shaking hands and flipped the cover open. Inside was a stack of highly classified-looking documents, banking ledgers, and intercepted emails. He skimmed the top page and his heart completely stopped. These are your debts, Amelia said smoothly. The hidden credit lines you opened under dummy corporations, the $400,000 you owe to a very unsavory private equity group in Chicago to fund your extravagant lifestyle, and the down payment on that engagement ring you made sure nobody saw. You were drowning Dominic. You needed the VP position at Harrison and Tate not just for ambition but for survival. If you didn't get that bonus, they were going to break your legs. Dominic stared at the paper, completely paralyzed. How did you get this? I am the crown princess of a sovereign nation with an intelligence apparatus older than the United States, Amelia stated coldly. I know what you had for breakfast 3 years ago. I knew about your debts before I accepted your proposal. Dominic looked up bewildered. If you knew, why did you say yes? Because I thought you were trying to be better. Amelia said, a flicker of genuine sadness passing behind her eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. I thought your ambition was born of a desire to build a life for us. I was prepared to quietly clear your debts the moment we were married. I was prepared to give you the world, Dominic. She tapped her manicured finger against the mahogany desk. But then you tried to hire Simon Gallagher to destroy my family's name. She said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You tried to spin a narrative that I am a cruel puppet master. I was desperate. Dominic cried, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. DuPont fired me. My life is over. I have nothing left. You had me, Amelia replied simply. And you threw me away because Caroline DuPont had a shiny dress and her father had a fat checkbook. You are exactly where you put yourself. Amelia stood up, buttoning her suit jacket. The meeting was over. Here is what is going to happen, Dominic, she said, looking down at him from across the desk. You are going to sign a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad that if you ever speak my name, write my name, or imply my existence to anyone for the rest of your natural life, you will owe the Crown of Kensington $50 million. She pushed a pen across the desk. Secondly, my family's sovereign fund is purchasing your debt from the Chicago Equity Group. You no longer owe them. You owe the House of Kensington. Dominic's eyes widened in horror. What? We are restructuring your loan. Amelia smiled a cold, predatory expression. You will be paying us back at an 18% interest rate for the rest of your life. I don't have a job. I'm blacklisted. Dominic panicked, standing up. How am I supposed to pay you? That sounds like an administrative problem, Mr. Chandler. Amelia said, turning her back to him and walking toward the towering windows. Perhaps you should look into archival work. I hear the pay is terrible, but it builds character. Amelia, you can't do this to me, Dominic shouted, losing the last shreds of his sanity. This is ruin. This is a life sentence. Noah Sterling stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Dominic's shoulder, forcing him back down into the chair. Sign the document, Mr. Chandler. Noah rumbled softly near his ear. Or Her Royal Highness leaves the room, and I handle your debt collection personally. Dominic looked at the terrifying SAS operative, then out the window at the woman he had discarded like trash. He realized with crushing absolute finality that he had played a game of chess against a grandmaster, and he hadn't even known he was on the board. With a trembling hand, Dominic picked up the pen and signed his life away. Amelia didn't even turn around to watch him do it. She stood looking out over the skyline of New York, a city built on ambition, ruthlessness, and power. She had come here looking for a normal life, a normal love. She hadn't found it. But as she heard the scratch of the pen on paper sealing Dominic Chandler's ruin, she realized something else. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The throne wasn't a cage, it was a weapon, and she was finally ready to wield it. Escort him out, Noah, Amelia said softly to the glass, and fumigate the chair. The destruction of Dominic Chandler was merely the appetizer. Amelia had no intention of leaving the main course unfinished. For 48 hours after the incident at the plaza, Richard DuPont believed the storm had passed. He had fired the offending employee, distanced his firm from the scandal, and instructed his PR department to issue a bland corporate statement condemning unprofessional behavior in the private sector. He genuinely believed that the House of Kensington, a trillion-dollar sovereign entity, would not disrupt global financial markets over a petty social slight. He had deeply miscalculated the nature of a crown princess who had just shed her disguise. At 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, the boardroom of Harrison and Tate Holdings, perched on the 52nd floor of a glass skyscraper overlooking Central Park, was bathed in the cold, sterile light of an impending massacre. Richard DuPont sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by William Abernathy, the firm's CEO, and a dozen senior partners. The heavy doors swung open, and an executive assistant scurried in her face the color of parchment. She didn't speak. She simply handed William Abernathy a red manila folder. Abernathy opened it. As his eyes scanned the single sheet of paper inside, the color drained from his face. He looked as if he had just been informed the building was rigged with explosives. "William!" Richard barked, irritated by the interruption. "What is it?" "It's Vanguard Kensington." Abernathy whispered, his voice trembling so violently it barely carried across the room. "They're pulling out." "Pulling out of what?" Richard demanded, leaning forward. "The tech merger. The real estate portfolio." Everything Richard Y. Abernathy said, sliding the paper down the table. "They have invoked the morals and ethics clause embedded in all our multilateral investment agreements. They cite a hostile and discriminatory environment perpetuated by senior leadership. They are liquidating their entire position in Harrison and Tate." The boardroom erupted into a cacophony of panicked shouts. That's impossible," Richard roared, slamming his fist on the table. "They hold $12 billion in our leveraged buyouts. If they liquidate it, we'll trigger a mass sell-off. The stock will plummet. We'll be facing a liquidity crisis by noon. Yay? They aren't just liquidating," Abernathy corrected, staring dead-eyed at his senior partner. "They have already initiated the transfer, and they've publicly filed the regulatory paperwork with the SEC. Every terminal on Wall Street is going to see this in exactly 4 minutes. BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, and JP Morgan will smell blood in the water. They will margin call us before lunch." Richard DuPont fell back into his leather chair, the air expelled from his lungs. The reality of his arrogance crushed down on him like a physical weight. He had insulted a woman in a vintage dress, and in return she was vaporizing a 100-year-old financial empire. While Richard's world collapsed in a boardroom, his daughter's reality was unraveling in a much more public, excruciating arena. Caroline DuPont was sitting in the VIP lounge of a flagship luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue. She had spent the morning trying to ignore the tabloid headlines about Dominic Chandler, deciding that retail therapy was the only cure for the lingering embarrassment. She had selected a rare Himalayan crocodile leather handbag, priced at a staggering $85,000, and handed her Black American Express card to the obsequious store manager. She sipped her complimentary champagne, waiting for the familiar, satisfying printout of the receipt. Instead, the manager returned a few minutes later. He wasn't smiling. In fact, he looked deeply uncomfortable holding her sleek, heavy metal card between 2 fingers, as if it were radioactive. "I'm so sorry, Ms. DuPont," the manager said softly, leaning in to ensure the other wealthy patrons didn't hear. "But the card has been declined. Caroline blinked, a sharp, indignant laugh escaping her lips. Excuse me. That's a Centurion card. There is no limit. Run it again. Your machine is obviously broken. I did run it again, ma'am. 3 times. The manager insisted, his tone hardening just a fraction. I even called the authorization line. Your account has been suspended by the primary guarantor. Caroline snatched the card from his hand, her cheeks flushing crimson. She pulled out her phone and dialed her father's private wealth manager at Harrison and Tate. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed her personal trust administrator. Also voicemail. Finally, she dialed her father's direct cell phone. He answered on the 4th ring. Daddy, Caroline hissed, keeping her voice low as she noticed the boutique staff whispering behind the counter. What is going on? My card was just declined at the boutique. Fix this immediately. It's completely humiliating. Go home, Caroline. Richard's voice came through the speaker. He didn't sound angry. He sounded hollow, like a ghost. I am not going home until I have this bag, she snapped. Call Amex. Caroline listened to me very carefully. Richard said, the sheer despair in his tone finally piercing her entitlement. The firm is currently down 40% in pre-market trading. My assets have been frozen by the board pending an emergency investigation. Your trust fund is tied to my equity. There is no money. Go back to the penthouse and start packing. The phone line went dead. Caroline stood frozen in the center of the boutique, the $85,000 bag resting on the glass counter, suddenly millions of miles out of her reach. The safety net that had shielded her from the consequences of her cruelty for 30 years had just been severed. She was falling, and there was no one left to catch her. 3 weeks later, the dust had settled into a grim new reality for the elite of Manhattan. Harrison and Tate had barely survived the bloodbath, kept alive only by a humiliating bailout from a consortium of rival banks. Richard DuPont had been forced by the board to step down as senior partner and disgrace, his personal net worth slashed by hundreds of millions of dollars. He was now a pariah in the circles he once ruled. It was against this backdrop of financial carnage that Crown Princess Amelia made her first official public appearance. It was the annual United Nations Global Philanthropy Summit held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Temple of Dender was illuminated by hundreds of floating candles, reflecting off the glass walls that separated the ancient stones from the modern city. The guest list was a who's who of global powerheads of state tech billionaires and the titans of industry. Amelia arrived not as a +1, but as the guest of honor. She stepped out of the armored diplomatic vehicle wearing a custom deep crimson gown that swept the steps of the Met. Woven into her hair was the Kensington tiara, a breathtaking array of flawless diamonds and pigeon blood rubies that had been worn by her ancestors for 4 centuries. She didn't look like a woman who had recently suffered a broken engagement. She looked like a conqueror. Colonel Noah Sterling walked a half step behind her, his eyes scanning the crowds of flashing cameras with practiced lethal precision. As Amelia entered the grand hall, the noise of the summit noticeably dimmed. Power recognizes power. The billionaires who had ignored her at the plaza now tripped over themselves, trying to catch her eye, hoping for a nod or a brief moment of her time. But Amelia had a very specific appointment. She bypassed the main reception and walked toward a secluded guarded antechamber off the main hall. Standing inside, looking visibly aged and thoroughly defeated, was Richard DuPont. Beside him stood Caroline, wearing a dress she had clearly worn to a previous gala, a cardinal sin in her former social circle. Her posture, once haughty and upright, was now stooped with the heavy burden of consequence. They had begged the consulate for a 5-minute audience. Amelia had granted it purely for closure. Your Royal Highness, Richard said, his voice cracking as he immediately bowed his head. Beside him, Caroline awkwardly dropped into a deep trembling curtsy. Mr. DuPont, Amelia said, her voice echoing coldly against the stone walls. You look tired. I have lost my firm, ma'am, Richard said, staring at the floor. I have lost my reputation. My family is facing complete financial restructuring. I have come to beg for your forgiveness, for my blindness, and for the utterly unacceptable behavior of my daughter." Amelia let her gaze drift to Caroline, who refused to look up, tears silently tracking through her makeup. "Forgiveness is a divine concept, Mr. Dupont. I am merely a princess," Amelia replied smoothly. "What you experienced over the last 3 weeks was not revenge. It was a market correction. You told Mr. Chandler that you needed men unburdened by loyalty. You praised ruthlessness. Vanguard Kensington simply applied your own corporate philosophy to our investment strategy. If you build your house on the premise that people are disposable, you cannot complain when you are thrown away." Richard closed his eyes, swallowing the bitter pill of absolute defeat. "Is there anything I can do to make amends? Any charitable donation? Any public statement?" "No," Amelia said firmly. "You have already provided a very valuable lesson to the market, but I will offer a piece of advice to your daughter." Caroline flinched, finally looking up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and terrified. "Ms. Dupont." Amelia stepped closer, the diamonds of her tiara catching the low light. "The next time you see someone standing quietly in the corner of a room wearing a dress you do not recognize, do not assume they are beneath you. You never know who is holding the keys to your entire existence. I suggest you learn how to make your own champagne warm. You're going to be pouring it yourself for a very long time." Amelia turned her back on them, sweeping out of the antechamber. The heavy wooden doors closed, sealing the Duponts into the suffocating reality of their new irrelevant lives. As she re-entered the main gala, Noah leaned in close. "Ma'am, perimeter breach at the south entrance. It's been handled, but you should be informed." Amelia paused. "Who? Dominic Chandler." Noah said, a note of deep disgust in his voice. "He bypassed the outer NYPD barricade, claimed he was a registered guest. When security turned him away, he began screaming your name. He appeared intoxicated." Amelia felt a fleeting pang of pity, instantly smothered by cold logic. "And where is he now?" "In the back of an NYPD squad car being processed for criminal trespassing and public intoxication," Noah replied smoothly. "Furthermore, by screaming your name in a public forum, he has explicitly violated Section 4, Paragraph 2 of his non-disclosure agreement." Amelia didn't break her stride as she walked toward the stage to deliver her keynote address. "Activate the $50 million penalty clause, Noah. Garnish whatever meager wages he attempts to earn moving forward. With pleasure, Your Royal Highness." 6 months passed, and the brutal winter winds of New York gave way to a crisp, bright spring. In a windowless subterranean concrete bunker in Newark, New Jersey, the hum of fluorescent lights provided a maddening soundtrack. This was the Municipal Archives Annex, where decades of moldering, water-damaged tax records were sent to be manually digitized. Sitting at a tiny, cramped desk in the corner was Dominic Chandler. He wore a faded, ill-fitting gray sweater. His hair was thinning and dark circles were permanently bruised under his eyes. He methodically typed a string of numbers from a yellowed piece of paper into an archaic computer system, his fingers numb from the cold. When his shift ended, he received his bi-weekly pay stub. He opened the envelope with trembling hands. The gross amount was $950, but after taxes and after the massive, legally mandated 80% garnishment legally enforced by the international courts, to pay his debt to the Vanguard Kensington Sovereign Wealth Fund, his take-home pay was exactly $142.50. He had to choose between paying for the electricity in his microscopic studio apartment or buying groceries for the week. As he walked out of the bleak facility to catch the bus, he passed a newsstand. The global edition of Time magazine was displayed prominently on the rack. The cover featured a stunning, high-resolution portrait of Amelia. She was sitting in the grand stateroom of Kensington Palace. She was not wearing a tiara, nor was she wearing the vintage, unassuming clothes she had worn in New York. She wore a sharp, modern power suit, looking directly into the camera, with an expression of unyielding intelligence and absolute sovereignty. The headline read, "The New Architect of Power, Crown Princess Amelia Revolutionizes Global Philanthropy and Finance." Dominic stopped the icy wind biting through his thin jacket. He stared at the face of the woman he had called just a friend. He remembered the smell of her shampoo in their old apartment. He remembered the way she used to laugh at his terrible jokes. He remembered the ring he had bought hidden away, ashamed to give it to her. He reached into his pocket. He didn't even have enough spare change to buy the magazine. Dominic lowered his head, pulled his collar up against the cold, and walked toward the bus stop, disappearing into the gray, nameless crowds of the city. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of a life he had burned down with his own 2 hands. Thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean, Amelia stood on the balcony of Kensington Palace. The sprawling, immaculate gardens stretched out before her, blooming with the first roses of the season. She held a cup of Earl Grey tea, enjoying the quiet morning silence. The heavy mahogany doors behind her opened, and King Edward stepped onto the balcony. He was an older man, his hair entirely silver, but his posture was as straight as a sword. "You're up early, Amelia," the king observed, standing beside his daughter. "There is much to do, father." Amelia smiled softly, looking out over the grounds. "The new European Tech Initiative requires my review before lunch, and Noah insists on running me through the updated security protocols for the Paris summit." King Edward looked at her, pride softening the stern lines of his face. "You went to America looking for a normal life. You were so convinced that the crown was a burden that prevented you from finding genuine humanity." "I was naive," Amelia admitted, taking a sip of her tea. "I thought stepping down from the pedestal would make me safe. I thought hiding my power would invite real love. But I learned a very harsh truth, father." "And what is that, my dear?" Amelia turned to look at the king, her eyes reflecting the ancient, unbroken strength of their bloodline. Power isn't something you hide to make small men feel comfortable," she said quietly, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a reigning monarch. "It is something you wield to protect yourself from them. I am done playing the friend. It is time to be the queen." She turned back to the horizon, the morning sun catching the delicate teardrop sapphire that rested eternally at her throat. The experiment was over. The rain had begun. Amelia's story is a chilling reminder of a universal truth: never diminish your own light to make someone else comfortable in the dark. Dominic Chandler thought he was discarding a liability, only to realize he had thrown away the most powerful asset of his life. True character is revealed not when we think everyone is watching, but in how we treat those we believe have nothing to offer us. Amelia traded her disguised heartbreak for her rightful crown, proving that the ultimate revenge is simply ascending to the heights you always belong to. If this story of ultimate betrayal and royal justice kept you on the edge of your seat, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to show your support, share it with someone who loves a dramatic twist of fate, and hit that subscribe button for more incredible high-stakes stories. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Amelia's shoes?